Welcome to this Excel tips video. My name is Neale Blackwood and we are going to answer 4 questions. Let's have a look at the first one. I frequently protect sheets without using a password to ensure users don't accidentally change something they shouldn't. Is there an easy way to unprotect all the sheets in a workbook and then protect them again? Now, there's no built-in way to unprotect and protect multiple sheets. It's sort of a sheet-by-sheet process. But you can use a macro to achieve what you want. Now, when you don't use a password, the macros you need are quite straightforward, and we'll see them in a minute. I'll also provide the macros to work with a password. So if you do want to put a password on there, I'll show you how you can do that as well. But first, I'll just show you how you do this manually. So at the moment, this sheet's okay. I can enter anything in here. But if we go to Review and Protect Sheet, what we can do is we can just click OK at this point. And what that does is it protects the sheet without a password. And when you do that, it basically does stop people trying to change things. When you don't use a password, the user can just do this. They can just click Unprotect, and the sheet is now ready to type into. Okay, so it does help you stop accidental changes, but if someone wants to unprotect the sheet, it's really easy, so it doesn't really stop that. Let's have a look at a macro. Now, all of these sheets at the moment are unprotected, so there's no protection on them. So here is the macro. So when you press Alt F11, it opens up Excel's VBA window. Now this is a totally separate window to Excel. It's actually very old school. It's got the old menu system and the old toolbar system across the top. And these are 4 macros that can help you. So this one here protects all of the sheets. So if you click inside this macro, so the name is Protect All Sheets. If you click this little button here, this sort of runs it. So when I click that, whatever file is open is going to be, all of the sheets are going to be protected. So if I go back here now and try and type something in, you'll see it won't let me. But again, I can just go Unprotect to clear it. And all of these sheets, so if I go all the way down to here, you can see this one has the Unprotect button, which means it is protected. So if I try and change something, it stops me. Now, the other macros there, let's go have a look at those. And this is the Unprotect. So this does, so I can unprotect all of them at once. So click there, click the play, and that fixes all of them. If you just want to work on the current sheet, so with this one here at the moment, we can type in something. And if I just want to lock this one, now obviously I can hit Protect and then hit OK. And I'll show you how to do it using the View ribbon. So on the View, at the far end of the View ribbon is the Macros button. If you click that, you can see the macros. Now, these are all open workbooks. If you click the drop down and just say this workbook, then these are the macros that are there. Now, I haven't shown you all of them yet. I'll show you the other ones. But if I just want to protect this sheet, that's the one there that'll do it. And you can just click Run. And so now this is protected, but these other ones I think are still unprotected. So that's good. So Alt F11 opens up the window, and then you can unprotect a particular sheet using this macro. So there's 4 separate macros. The first 2 work on all of the sheets in the file, and the second 2 just work on the active sheet. Now, if we scroll down, these are the macros that work with a password. These are slightly longer because they have the extra option in here to define the password, which I've just set at ABC123. Now, obviously, there's not much security here because if you go into the macro, you'll see the password. But it is an easy way to apply a password across multiple sheets, and then this one takes it out. I've just put the PW on the end, stand for password, for these macros. So there's 8 macros here. The first 4 work without a password, and the last 4 work with a password. And they work on the open file. So if you go into that VBA window and you've got another file open, then this will work on that other file as well. So it works on whatever the active file is at the time. Now I need to give my macro warning. So macros are really powerful, but they have one big drawback, and that is they clear the undo list. So what that means is you can't undo what the macro did, and you can't undo anything you did before you ran the macro. So in general, what you do is you save the file, run the macro. If everything's good, no problems. If something goes wrong, what you do is you close the file and you don't save. So that puts the file back into the situation before the macro was run. Okay, so you do that a lot when you're learning macros because you're not really sure what's happening. But yeah, just be very careful that the macros do clear the undo list, which can be a little bit frustrating. Okay, let's have a look at the next question. So that related to overtime. I must calculate time and a half and double time hours from a total overtime figure in column C. The first 2 hours of overtime are time and a half, and the rest is all double time. Can you provide if functions to do the calculations? If functions do perplex a lot of people. So here is the total overtime. So we can see we've got some hours here. Basically the first 8 hours is normal, and then anything over that is treated as overtime. And what we need to do is allocate this overtime between time and a half, which is the first 2 hours, and then anything left is double time. So there's a few ways to do this. So I'll start with the if function. So the if function allows you to look at a comparison. Now, is something greater than something, or is something less than something? And if that's true, you can do one thing, and if it's false, you can do something else. So let's have a look at the if function. So this is in cell D2. We check what the value is in C2 by comparing it to the number 2, because that's the first 2 hours of overtime are at time and a half. So if the value in column C is greater than 2, we're basically maxing out the time and a half, so it's going to be 2. Otherwise, we're going to use whatever value is in cell C2, which means it's 2 or less. Okay, and that's just copied down. So that gets you the time and a half. Now, the double time, to be honest, you don't need an if function to do that, because you've already calculated the time and a half. Everything else is double time, so you can just subtract the time and a half from the total overtime, and that will give you the double time. If you did want to put an if function in here, it would be something like this. So if C2 is greater than 2, then we would do C2 minus 2, comma, otherwise we'd just have 0. So that will give us the same result. Okay, so that's one way to do it, and that's using the if function. There is another way to do it. So let's have a look at that. When you're dealing with numbers and 0, so whether you're going to display a number or display 0, if it's a choice between those two, sometimes the min function and the max function, so min stands for minimum and max stands for maximum, sometimes they can simplify the calculation. So for cell D2, what we can use is the min function. So the min function is going to look at these two values, either whatever value is in C2 and the number 2. Whichever one is the lowest, so the minimum, is going to be displayed. So what that means is this will never display anything above 2. So 2 is the largest value that can be displayed in this cell, which is what we want. For the double time, what we can do is something similar. We can go for a max, but what we can do is subtract 2 from the values of the total overtime and then compare that to 0. Now, obviously, if the number is less than 2, it's going to give you a negative, which means that the 0 is going to show. So any negatives are avoided by using this technique. Also, if the value in C is greater than 2, there's going to be a number, and that number is what's going to be displayed. So as you can see there, and both of those formulas have been copied down. So sometimes you can use the min and the max functions in a similar way to if, but the formulas are a little bit shorter. Okay, let's have a look at the third question. Now, the third question doesn't have a sheet because the question involves sort of a system feature of Excel. What is the XLSTART folder? Well, you may never have heard of the XLSTART folder. It's a special system-generated folder that Excel uses for 3 things. The first is what files open when Excel opens. You can put files or links to files in this XLSTART folder, and all of those will open when Excel opens, so automatically. So for example, you might want to use that for something like a timesheet or something that you might always open. The next thing it uses it for, there's a special file that Excel has called the Personal Macro Workbook. It's actually just called Personal, and I'll show you the folder actually. Now, where the XLSTART folder resides on your hard drive depends on your version of Excel. So this is my one. So if I click on it, you can see the actual path of the folder. So it's in the App Data, Roaming, Microsoft Excel, and then XLSTART. So this is the Personal Macro Workbook. So all my personal macros are stored there. So that's the second thing that you can use it for. The third thing, this is an example of the third thing, it's a template. So there's 2 types of templates that you can put into this XLSTART folder, and the first is a book template. So when you create a brand new book, you can define what that looks like using this book template that you save as a template. This is an Excel template in this XLSTART folder. There's also, you can save a sheet here, and that is the template for a blank sheet that you open in Excel. So you can save another file here called sheet, and that will automatically create the sheet, the default sheet. Okay, so that is what the XLSTART folder is. Now, the couple of things to be aware of. It's on the hard drive, so as you can see there, it's on the C drive. That means it may not get backed up in a typical backup. So it's a good idea to keep a copy of these files in a folder somewhere on your system that does get backed up, and just update it fairly regularly. One problem with the XLSTART folder is it can move around when you update, and it can also be cleared when you update Excel. So another good reason to actually make a backup of it somewhere else. Okay, let's get back to Excel. Here's the last question. I've used spreadsheets that let you follow a link in a cell by double clicking on the cell, but I can't find the setting that makes this work. What setting do I have to change? Now, this one's a funny one in that the setting you change is not named anything like what you think it would be. So basically, here's what you want to do. So here's a link to another sheet. Or we'll do this one first. This links up to A1. So if I double click this, it takes me to A1. This cell here is linked to another sheet. So if I double click this cell, it's going to take me to that sheet. There we go. Now, here's a tip. If you want to go back to where you were when you followed the link, you press the F5 key, the F5 function key, and then you press enter. Excel remembers where you were and it will take you back. Now, the setting you change has to do with editing in a cell. Normally, when you double click a cell, it actually edits in that cell. Now, I don't use that because I do all my formula editing. That's right, we've protected this sheet, so I better unprotect it. So when you edit, I do all my editing in the formula bar up the top here. The only time I'll do editing in the cell is when I'm doing training. Okay, so let's have a look at the setting we need to change. It's under File, it's under Options, it's under Advanced, and there it is there, Allow Editing Directly in Cells. Now, the default setting is for it to be on. So if I tick it and put it back on, when I double click the cell here, you'll see I edit in the cell. So that's what the double click does when that option is turned on. When it's turned off, which is what I'm going to do now, when it's turned off, that's when the double click will follow a link. So it's a very useful technique to use. There is another way to do that. So there is a keyboard shortcut that follows a link. So if you want to follow a link, hold the Control key down and press the left square bracket. And that does exactly the same thing. So Control key, left square bracket, and that takes you to where the link is. That other shortcut, F5 and then enter, takes you back as well. You just press them in sequence, you don't hold them down. With the function keys too, by the way, remember on some laptops you need to press another, usually an FN key, to actually access the function keys, because they sometimes have a cut down keyboard on laptops. So just a heads up when you are using the function keys on a laptop. Okay, so that is the answers to the 4 questions. We looked at how we can do protection across multiple sheets. We looked at some if functions to calculate overtime. We looked at the good old XLSTART folder. And to find it, you might need to just search on your hard drive. So it's always on your C drive. So just search there for XLSTART. And it will track it down for you. You might not have anything in it. This is called the Personal Macro Workbook. It's created when you record your first macro and save it to the Personal Macro Workbook. I'll show you that. So if you go to record a macro, so that's under View, Macros, Record. So macros are recorded. Excel writes the code for you. When you save it here, so store macro in Personal Macro Workbook, when you do that the first time, that's what creates that Personal Macro Workbook. It won't be there if you haven't created any macros. So just a heads up on that. So I'll just cancel that. Okay, so hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching.